When I was 11 years old, I thought I would do just about anything to impress my bunkmates at Camp Hazen, right? Camp Hazen was this sleepaway camp I had gone to, my whole life. I love this place. And I was really psyched that summer when I was 11 because I get to camp and I find out I'm going to be in the older boys' bunk, right? It's on the top of the hill. And I remember the first night that I'm in the bunk, this counselor, Hugh, he's up and he's kind of leading this powwow. He's this huge British guy. He's cursing like a sailor, and all the other kids in the bunk, right? They're talking about their basketball trophies and their, exploits at the skate park and kissing girls and all this stuff. And I was really excited. I was like, these kids are great. But at the same time, I was pretty nervous. I recognized I was more of like a read Harry Potter, stay in, play some video games type kid. And I was very concerned that, I was going to be kind of found out for that. But I'm like, all right, I'm going to make it work. And, camp's going on, and we're kind of getting in the flow of things. And I find out that our counselor, Hugh, he's putting together this epic prank, right? And I'm like, this is my moment. So I managed to be there when it's getting all planned out. And, the anticipation's building day after day. And finally the morning comes, and there's this cohort of us. We all slip out of bed at 5 a.m. silent, right? And we meet Hugh out in the woods. And Hugh's got all this black face paint we're putting on, like war paint, right? And he's got all this pirate gear we're throwing it on. And we sneak through camp like this gang of marauders until we get to the dining hall. It's this huge dining hall. And we pull out all the tables, pull out all the chairs, and we build this massive fortress out in front of the dining hall, right? And then we go back in and we fill up hundreds of water balloons. And so we've got our fortress, we've got our ammunitions, and we man our posts, and we wait. And so after a little while, this car pulls up to the dining hall, and out steps Chef Joe. And Chef Joe's kind of this celebrity at camp, right? He'd always come out and do these bits, and everyone loved him at camp, but he was not happy Chef Joe that morning. And he just walks right up to Hugh, and he looks right at me and says, this might be fun for you, but it's me and my staff who are going to clean up your mess. And with that, he turns to you and he storms off, and he was just livid. And it clicked for me in that moment in my 11-year-old brain, like, oh yeah, hundreds of people are about to come down to eat, and they're not really going to be able to do breakfast, and obviously we're going to be busted, and there's probably going to be some real consequences for this. And I'm standing there, and as this adrenaline's fading, and I'm feeling that black face paint kind of dry and cake on my face, and that pirate hat's a little too big, it's sliding down. I'm like, this isn't me. I got to get out of here, right? And so I go to Hugh, and I'm like, I got to leave. And he's like, all right. And he kind of opens up this gap in the fort for me, and I walk out, and as I'm walking out, there's this confusion behind me. Kids don't really understand, but when they see that I'm leaving, they actually start to boo me. And so I took off running. And I'll never forget that moment of just running through those empty fields of Camp Hazen as the kids who I so desperately was trying to impress just jeered me. And I didn't stop running until I reached my cabin, and I washed off that face paint, and I crawled back into bed. And a little while later, the bells for breakfast go off, right? And I kind of file in with everyone else who's going down. And sure enough, there they are, Hugh, the counselors, roaring, and all the boys are whooping up a storm, and all the kids from camp are dodging the water balloons. And I just tried my best to be invisible that day. And for a really long time, I thought about this as a really painful memory about this time that I let fear and anxiety drive my decision-making and rob me of this fun experience. But more recently, I've been reflecting upon how much time and how much energy I spent as a kid trying to impress the people who I idolized. And how every time it turned out the same way. But it was just at Camp Hazen that it was the most obvious who was standing on the inside and where I was standing. And so instead, I'd like to think of this story as a lesson. That instead of spending my energy impressing the people I idolize, I need to spend it finding friends who are going to build me up. Because while the Hughes of the world are out there at 5 a.m., pulling their hijinks, saying, fuck the consequences, there's a lot of us who'd be perfectly fine getting 8 hours of sleep. You know? And we can be there for each other, and that's all right with me. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Lisa Cain. I woke up to my mother's tenuous relationship with the truth when she crashed a sailboat. I was 15 years old, and I got an internship at a sailing school. This was in City Island, the Bronx. I had learned how to sail earlier than that when I was a kid in Baustin. I don't know if you know about the sailing program on the Charles River, but I sailed there every summer, and I loved sailing. And when we moved to New Rochelle, New York, I didn't have a place to sail, so I found this wonderful sailing school that gave me this internship. And I would ride my bike down there, and I'd mow the lawn or paint a fence, and they gave me free hours to sail for the time I would work. It was wonderful. My mother also decided at that point to learn how to sail as well. So she took a class there, and then one day I took her out on one of my free hours so she could practice. And it was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, the wind was perfect. It was just wonderful on Long Island Sound that day. And we went out, we took food, we had fun. And then in the end, my mom decided she wanted to try this maneuver, which is where you pull the boat to a buoy and you stop it. Now, if you know anything about sailing, when you're under sail, you don't have any brakes, okay? You have to actually pull the boat to a stop by forcing it into the wind, and that's the only way to stop it. And it's actually kind of difficult, especially to do it at a point. So my mom aimed at the buoy, blew by it, and slammed into another boat. Bam! Now, you know anything about boats, big metal sound, shaking, stays, bam! Huge sound. I ran, I scurried to the back of the boat. I got back there, I pulled the boat around, I popped it on the buoy, and then we, dropped the sails, got going, and my mom said, "We are not going to say anything about this." And I thought, okay, this is not right. I said, "Mom, we probably should tell," "We are not going to say anything about this." So she was my hero. She's my mother. And at that point in my life, she was a goddess to me. So I listened and I said, okay. And then Steve, the son of the owner, came and picked us up in a launch. That's how it worked. You pick up in a launch and you go back to the dock, piled our stuff in. We got to the dock. We walked away with our stuff up to the car to put the stuff in the trunk. And he showed up with the owner of the sailing school, which was his father, Carl. And he said, "You think you're going to leave here without telling me about that?" My stomach just dropped because I knew by the way they were looking at me that they were incredibly disappointed and frustrated. My mother said nothing. She said nothing. And Steve took us back out in the launch, back out to the boat. We looked at the bow, and there was a huge chunk out of it. Now, this was a practice boat. This was a sailing school, so that had happened before, but still, it was something, a chunk. And I learned two things from this. The first is not telling the truth has consequences, because the next day, I rode my bike to go work there, and they didn't have anything for me to do. So the immediate consequence was I lost my chance to sail that summer and subsequent summers on Long Island Sound. The second thing was when I saw those two people look at us and look at my mother, I saw her through their eyes. I saw the disappointment toward them, toward her. And I realized that I didn't like her. And that this thin veneer she would put over things when things were challenging, and this desire not to deal with difficult things and just pretend it's not happening, that was not me. I wanted to be different. I'm okay with the truth. I'm okay when things are challenging. I wanted to deal with truths. And I wish I could tell you all right now that she bought me a sailboat, and like at the end of a great sitcom, everybody giggled, and it was all just about embarrassing moments, but that wouldn't be the truth.
My name is Joe Gannon. I call this story The Coward and the Turtle. Show us your tattoos! Show us your tattoos! Now, I spent the evening before in this neighborhood in San Salvador that was held by the FMLN rebels who'd started this final offensive against the US-backed government that was mostly made up of bankers and death squad psychopaths. And about 0:30, I tried to sneak between the lines, try to get back to my hotel. And I go around the corner, and I run into this squad of soldiers, and they're all bedraggled and angry, and this huge guy with a bayonet comes running up at me. Show us your tattoos! Show us your tattoos! I go, I don't have any, I don't have any. He's like, show us your tattoos! I go, I don't have any, I don't have any! And I didn't have any. I didn't have any underwear on either. So if I say the word turtle, I don't think every man in this place might understand that standing there with my drawers down, my junk had kind of retracted so far up inside of me, it must have looked like a turtle. And they were looking for a tall North American terrorist with big bushy beard and tattoos. But I didn't have any tattoos. But they arrested me anyways and brought me over to the National Police, and they had to handcuff me and blindfold me and bring me in for this paraffin test to see if you've been firing a weapon, you have gunpowder on you. And I wasn't worried about it, and after a few hours, they come along like, all right, Senor Gannon. I'm like, all right, here we go. I'm gonna go back to my hotel, got a good story to tell. But they have to handcuff me and blindfold me to transport me. And when they finally let me up and take the blindfold off, as we're going in, it doesn't say El Camino Real. It says Policía de Hacienda, the Treasury Police. At that time, officially designated by Amnesty International as the most murderous group of uniformed men in the hemisphere. And I'm just going, no, 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 no. And they bring me into this dingy little room, and there's angry corporals running around everywhere. They're all corporals, and they're all angry because they're fucking losing the war. And they sit me down, and they go through this long questionnaire, but then they just leave me in this dingy little room, and I look down on this filthy linoleum floor. There's really this little stain that looks like this little turtle. It's got like two little legs and its little hands, so I just stare into that thing and kind of hypnotize myself and eventually calm down enough to imagine regaling a table full of journalists with my story about not having any tattoos or any underwear. And in a little while, they bring this other guy in, and they slam him into this chair. And they're angry, but they seem to be just angry in general. And I look at this guy, and right away I see he's got these deep grooves in his thumbs, because that's how the police and the death squads did it. They'd restrain you by tying your thumbs behind your back. And he had these deep grooves along his side of his head where the blindfold had cut in. I'm like, man, they'd been driving this guy for hours, which means he's from the deep countryside where the real shit went down. But he's a dirt farmer. He's got cracked nails and splayed toes in his bare feet and this sun-caked skin, the sun-baked skin. And he's a campesino. And angry Corporal number 2 comes over and starts to have the long interrogation for him. And man, their conversation went south very quickly. It got as far as fecha de nacimiento, date of birth. And the campesino goes, ¿Qué me dice usted, señor? What did you say, sir? And that corporal says, fecha de nacimiento. And the guy goes, ¿Qué me dice, señor? When were you born, you fucking moron? And the campesino goes, oh, summertime. Because in 1989 in El Salvador, that's all he knew. The corporal's like, fucking farmers. Fine, wait. And the guy goes, ¿Qué me dice, señor? Because he didn't understand what it meant. Wait. And the corporal's like, fucking Christ, how much do you weigh? And the campesino got as far as ¿Qué me dice? And the corporal just grabbed him and slammed him into this other room, through the door, banging him. And they have a scale in there, one of those height and weight scales that they had me on. And it's right behind my chair, and I hear the corporal in there. I hear the clanging of the machine as he smashes that guy into the scale, and I hear his head slamming into it, and it's banging into my chair, and the corporal screaming, "How much do you fucking weigh? How much do you fucking weigh?" And that little bubble, man, that I'd managed to stay in was just popped. It's like in medieval times, they used to show you the instruments of your torture before they hurt you, and that's what they had done. They had showed me the instruments of my torture, and I just broke. I just caved. And they bring that guy back in, and I go back and I find that turtle on the floor, and I'm just staring at it, and they bring him in. But I can see him. He's got this blood coming down his face, and he makes this weird dog leg around the side of his jaw and down to his neck. And he's looking at me, and he's staring at me, and I know what he's thinking. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know why he's there. I know why he's there, and I'm a gringo, so I'm more powerful and richer than he will ever be. But I won't give it to him, and I feel it's like these tractor beam eyes on me, man, and I just won't give him that little glance, just a little nod like, "It's going to be okay, brother," even if it wasn't going to be, because I was just too scared. And after a little while, they came and got him and forced his head against the wall, put his thumbs back behind his back, and they take him out that door. And I know, man, to the right is the street and the main gates, and to the left is somewhere else. And amidst all the screaming and banging, all I hear is the word abajo, which means below. And he was gone. And 30 years later, still, when my ego gets a little too hot, Valley Voice's Story Slam has chosen you. And I think, I'll give him a war story. But what comes to mind is that campesino floating up out of the pools of my memory, and he makes me tell this story instead. I was a coward with a turtle between my legs.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kate. When my mother discovered my true identity, I knew the jig was up, which is truly unfortunate because she was just about to reveal which of her 6 children was secretly her favorite. I was pretty sure it was me. I'm the youngest of 7 and the accident in the family, or as my mother vastly prefers me to say, surprise. My mother had me when she was in her 40s. She claims she didn't know she could still get pregnant. Oops. Here I am. But there's also a 10-year gap between me and my sister Janice, who used to be the youngest until I was born. Janice, by the way, has only recently forgiven me for usurping her position as last in the family birth order. All of my other siblings thought I was spoiled rotten, which is not true. But I will admit that I was raised a little bit differently than the others. I, for example, I didn't have any curfew. I was never grounded. My mother never threw her shoe at me out of anger, as she was known to do with the others. My siblings would just sort of stand back and shake their heads like, how is this woman the same mother that we used to have? Being the youngest wasn't all sunshine and roses, to be honest. I mean, it did have its perks, but one of the worst things about being the youngest was, I mentioned Janice, right? She had this way of looking at me that made me feel like she was just waiting for the right moment to push me into oncoming traffic. It was exhausting being vigilant all the time. By far the worst part about being the youngest, though, was watching all my older brothers and sisters leave home one by one, off to college or to get married. By the age of 8, I found myself quite suddenly an only child. It was kind of lonely. But life teaches us that sometimes the worst thing turns out to be the best thing. And I found I had my mother to myself for those years after my siblings left. She was the one I played with. She was the one I read books with. She was the one I went on walks with. And I told her everything. Well, nearly everything. She became my best friend. So that brings me back to my story of mistaken identity. On the day in question, I was at work and my father called me in a panic. Apparently, my mother, in a fit of anger, had thrown him, my sisters, and the visiting nurse out of the house. She'd fallen just a year ago and broken her hip, and my sisters and I were taking turns helping my 90-year-old father take care of her. So my father called me and said, "You've got to go. You've just got to go to the house. You're the only one who can talk to her when she gets like this." So I stopped. I bought some flowers. I went to the childhood home where I was raised, and I tiptoed quietly into the house, and I leaned my head into the bedroom. She looked like she was sleeping, so I went in, and I very carefully put the flowers on the bedstand, and her eyes popped open, and she looked at me, and I kind of cringed involuntarily. "Guy, don't throw me out, don't throw me out." Instead, she got this great big smile, and she said, "Oh, it's you. Would you rub my feet for me?" And, now that I think about it, that was a pretty odd request, but I was just honored at the time. So, of course, I wanted to be of use, and I started massaging her feet. And then out came the most beautiful stories of when she was swimming in Lake Howard and her first kiss, things I'd never heard before. But when she said, "Have I told you about my children?" That was my first clue she might not know who I was. And I said, "Well, I'm thinking to myself, I should probably confess, right, that, I'm not the nurse and I am her daughter," but it was too enticing to hear what she would say about each of us, so I decided I'd just let the charade continue. It ends up she only had glowing things to say about everyone. She called the oldest the reliable, dependable one. She called the middle child the smart one. When she got to my brother, she sort of sat up a little straighter and she sort of pulled the covers up and she said, "All these wonderful things. He's such a prince." And she said, "Well, I know I shouldn't have favorites. I don't have favorites. That would be wrong." And at that point, I kind of forgot my assumed identity. And I was just like, "What? Wait, I'm not the favorite?" And then my mother glared at me suspiciously. She said, "Why are you pretending to be my nurse?" And then I couldn't come up with a very good answer, so I took off my shoe and I handed it to her. And when I pretended to cower behind the bedpost, she just let out this giant laugh, and I hadn't heard it in months. It's the most beautiful sound I ever heard. And when I think back on that conversation now, she passed away only a few days after it. I realize what a great gift it really was to find out my mother was happy with her life. She was proud of how we all turned out. And the greatest gift was learning, even though I might not be the favorite, I could always make her laugh. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Oran Kaufman, a.k.a. Scared Shitless. So, I don't know about you, but I immediately feel guilty the minute I see a police officer. The problem was that this time I was guilty. As I saw the 3 Greek police coming towards me, my stomach was in knots. Now, let me back up. You have to know something about me. I'm a rule follower. I did as I was told when I was a kid. I did my homework. I didn't skip class. My idea of rebelling was I went to law school instead of medical school. I was just a nice Jewish boy from Cincinnati. So the year's 1982, and my friend Rich and I had just finished our junior year of college. And we went on our epic backpacking trip to Europe. These were the days of Let's Go Europe and Europe on $10 a day, and we were pretty serious about trying to stick within that $10 a day limit. We were poor college students, or at least pretending to be poor college students. And so we're on our epic trip, and we wind our way through Europe, and eventually we make it down to the beautiful island of Paros in Greece. And so within our $10 a day sort of schedule, we decided that night to sleep on this beach, despite the fact that as you enter the beach, there is a big sign in about 10 different languages, in English and Greek and Spanish and French, saying, "No sleeping on the beach." But we saw a lot of people on the beach. There were a lot of other backpackers and people from all places in Europe and Australia and New Zealand, and I figured, even though I didn't quite feel that comfortable with the idea of breaking the law, it wasn't really within my wheelhouse, there were a lot of other people, and I figured there's power in numbers, and what are they going to do, arrest us? So that night, big party on the beach, bonfire. We just had a great time. It was basically a united nation of backpackers. And the drink of choice that night was Ritsina. If any of you know Ritsina, it's got a historical roots in Greece, but suffice it to say, what you need to know for tonight is that it's disgusting. It basically tastes like pine resin, but it's cheap. And it came within our $10 a day limit. So we had a great time with Ritsina, went to sleep, woke up in the morning in a Ritsina-induced stupor, looked down the beach, and I see 3 police officers coming towards us, and they are collecting the passport of everybody on the beach. I'm panicking, like, oh, shit. What's going to happen? I'm going to end up in a Greek jail. What's going to happen with my college career? I was really panicking. So we couldn't run. There were mountains behind us. There was the water in front of us, and they were coming the only entrance. So Rich and I came up with a plan. It was a simple plan. It was actually a simplistic plan. And here was the plan. We pretended that we didn't speak English. I wasn't good at lying. So the Greek police officer comes up, and he says, oh, one more thing I got to tell you is that we didn't have a common language in addition to English. I mean, I spoke Spanish and Hebrew. Rich did not speak either of those, but he had gone to Sunday school. And he convinced me that that was okay. So police officer comes up to us and he says, "Passport." And I say, "Ani lo yodea ma ta medaber," which in Hebrew literally means I don't know what you're saying. It was like I could have said anything, but he says, "Passport." I speak in Hebrew, pretending not to speak English. Then he turns to my friend Rich and he says, "Passport." And Rich says, "Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam," which was the only Hebrew he knew, and if any of you knows what it means, "Praise be thou, O Lord, omnipotent, King of the universe." So we quickly realized that our gig was up, and that wasn't going to take us very far because passport means passport in just about every language. We eventually give over our passports, and we make our way to where all the other backpackers went, which was the police station in town. My stomach is in knots. I'm thinking, oh shit, I am going to end up being in a Greek jail. Like the Midnight Express had just come out a few years before, and nobody else seemed to be that concerned, but I was, being the rule follower that I was. Well, it turns out that this was the Greek equivalent of a speed trap. All they really wanted was for us to spend some money on the island, and we had to show them proof that we had gotten a hotel room or a campground, paid a fine, which put us over our $10 a day limit, but that's all they wanted. So that's what we did. We went to the campground, got a reservation, and that night at the campground with our little campfire eating day-old bread and feta, not Ritsina, we made a momentous decision. We decided to up our limit to $20 a day. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Doug. So it was about 30 years ago, and I was just about ready to move to the United States. All I needed to do was figure out what to do with my guns. In the end, I decided I'd keep the old 22 repeater. It wasn't worth anything, so I packed up my rental truck and I drove to the US border. When I got there, there's a little bridge, crossed over the little bridge, came up to the US border control. The agent there said, "Citizenship?" I said, "Canadian." "What's the reason for your trip?" I said, "I'm moving here." He said, "You're moving here? Do you have your immigration packet? Do you have your x-ray?" I said, "Yeah, I've got all that." He said, "Okay, well, pull over to the office. So I pulled over, went inside. I got to tell you, what a difference 30 years makes. There were 2 counters. There was the immigration counter, light-colored, open-neck, blue shirts, short sleeve, fun, friendly guys. And there was the customs counter. Black shirts, black ties, guns, not so friendly. So I went to the immigration counter. They were trying to figure out what forms to fill out, whether they should fingerprint me. They were a little bit disorganized. They said, we're going to work on the paperwork. Why don't you go over and talk to the customs guys? So I went and talked to the customs guys, and they said, do you have an inventory of all your belongings? I said, yeah. Anything less than a year old? I said, no. Any firearms? Well, yeah, I've got an old .22 caliber repeater. It's my grandfather bought it at a police auction. It's not worth anything. He said, well, I guess you're going to need a firearms importation certificate for that firearm. I said, yeah, okay, I guess I will. He said, well, they take 3 weeks to get. I said, well, it's not really worth anything. It's not important to me. They said, we don't want your gun. You're going to have to go back to Canada and get rid of it. So I went back over to the immigration counter. They said, we've got everything straightened out. Here's your passport. I opened it up. There's the visa. Good for 1 entry into the United States. I said, well, I've got a bit of a problem. They say I have to get rid of my gun back in Canada. They went, oh. Tell you what, we'll call the police over there and maybe they can help you out. So I get back in my rental truck. I turn around. I go back over the little bridge. I come up to the Canadian border. They say, citizenship? I said, Canadian. How long have you been in the United States? I said, 45 minutes. 45 minutes? What have you been doing for 45 minutes? I said, well, I'm trying to move to the States, but I've got this gun that they say I need to get rid of, and so I had to come back over here. And this was like a young, sort of fresh-faced, looked like maybe a college replacement who said, well, there is a provision in the statutes where you can surrender your firearm to the Queen. I said, yes, I want to surrender my firearm to the Queen. She said, okay. So she wrote this thing on a little piece of paper, handed it to me, said, go to the terminal. So I drove over to the terminal, went inside. There's all these truckers with loads of vegetables, standing, waiting. I waited. I got up to the counter. There was a woman back there who looked at this piece of paper and said, oh, God, you have a gun you want to get rid of? And just then, a guy tapped me on the shoulder saying, you got a gun you want to get rid of? And I said, no, this has to be totally above board. He said, no, that's fine. So he showed me his little permit, and we went out in the parking lot, and he was checking out the gun. I was writing up my receipt for $1. And just then the police pulled up and said, what's going on here? I said, well, I'm just selling this guy my gun. I just came over. He said, oh, are you the guy from the U.S. border? And I said, yeah. He said, okay. So he looked at everything. Everything looked fine. So I got back in my truck, drove over the little bridge, came up to the U.S. Border Control. They said, citizenship? And I said, Canadian. What's the reason for your visit? I said, I'm moving here. They said, are you the guy with the gun? And I said, yeah, I got rid of it. He said, oh, okay. Drive on through.
Hi, I'm Jim Brissette. I'd like to dedicate this story to Guy, Milt, Barry, and Richie. So I don't know who was more surprised that summer night in 1980. The man who showed up in front of the Howard Johnson's Motor Lodge in Greenfield, Massachusetts, right off Interstate 91, exit 26 at 2 a.m., completely naked. Or me, the 20-year-old desk clerk, home from college that summer, working the midnight to 8 shift, and being the Good Samaritan, unlocking that front door, letting the naked stranger in and handing him a towel. He was a pretty good-looking guy from the waist up, really tanned, looked about 40. He had this wavy blonde hair. And I asked him, what, are you a guest here? And he said, I was sleepwalking. I think I'm a guest here. I don't know my room. And I'm looking at him. He's starting to shiver because, it's a hot summer night. I've got the air conditioning cranking. Who has air conditioning in New England in 1980? So I'm taking full advantage of it. He's shivering. He's holding onto his towel tight. And I can tell he just wants to get back to his room, or he really wants to get back to any room. But I have to make sure he's really a guest. I'm responsible for 100 rooms. There's more than 100 people, and I hope they're all sleeping right now. So I go over to the room rack, which is, back in those days, that was a room where every slip of paper had a guest name, all typed up. There was no computers then. And I look up his name, and I'm going to just call him Mr. Bradford. I don't want to give his real name, Mr. Naked Bradford. And sure enough, there's a slip of paper with his name on it. M/M Bradford, naked, room 115. And I know the room. I've worked here as a desk clerk since I was a sophomore in high school, believe it or not. It's a ground floor room, faces the parking lot. It's got a sliding glass door that you can go in and out to your car. So he's a little antsy, but that's still not enough for me. I want to be sure. And I say, Mr. Bradford, I'll be glad to show you your room, because I know he doesn't have his key. And I just say, when you go down there, I'd like to see, your driver's license, just to be sure everything's okay. And he just nods because he wants to get going. And we go through the all-glass lobby, through an all-glass corridor. We go past the candy machine, past the soda machine, past the ice machine, past the cigarette machine. It's 1980. And we get to room 115. And I pause because if you've ever worked in a hotel, you do not know what you're going to find when you open the door. Richie tells me one night, I give these guys some extra towels, and what the fuck? There's a dead deer hanging up in the bathroom, bleeding all over. I open this door slowly. There's no deer. It's not hunting season. But the room is a complete disaster. Big mess in a tiny hotel room. This is 1980 style. Liquor bottles on every counter, every space, soda containers, food containers, newspapers, and of course clothes strewn all over the place. And on the far bed, sprawled out on the bed, a naked woman. I don't know if she's passed out. I don't know if she's dead. I go over to the sliding glass door, which is wide open. I shut it. I lock it. I shut the curtain, and I use this time to kind of check on Mrs. Naked Bradford, because I'm thinking, the room rack slip doesn't lie. M/M, Mr. and Mrs. By this time, Mr. Naked Bradford has been rummaging around, and he pulls out his license finally. And he gives it to me. I look at it. Yep, sure enough, it's him. It's even got the picture of his flowing hair. And being the good desk clerk, I say, is there anything else I can do for you tonight, Mr. Bradford? He just says no, and he hands me the towel. So he's naked once again. He slumps on his bed, and I say, well, thank you, sir, good night. And I go out the room, gently shut the door, and I've got just the towel in my hand, no tip. I'm a poor college student. I'm hoping for that tip. But anyways, I have thought about this story. It's been 39 years, and it's made me realize that I'm probably not that good Samaritan I was when I was 20. If a naked man showed up at my front door, I'm probably calling the police on my cell phone. And that kind of does make me a little sad, a little disappointed. And this all popped up because just a few weeks ago, the Howard Johnson's Motor Lodge in Greenfield, Massachusetts, off Interstate, exit 26, completely torn down. And I did never see Mr. and Mrs. Bradford naked or clothed ever again. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kate Mesmer. When I was 8 years old, I was dishonorably discharged from the Brownies. That was never my intention. In fact, my best friend, Carolyn, and I decided to join the Brownies because our older sisters had flown up and become Girl Scouts. And they did everything. They went camping, they made s'mores, they had the badges, they had the salute. They did everything, and it was just such a wonderful opportunity. And we finally got to join the Brownies. The very first meeting that we went to was held at the parochial school that I attended, St. Scholastica Elementary School in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we were all lined up outside of the school. There were 16, 18-year-old girls in their beanies and our little skirts. And we were kind of all jostling each other a bit. And my best friend was kind of engaged in this conversation with another girl that I didn't know. And before I knew it, this girl had taken her hands and shoved my best friend down a set of concrete stairs. Now, this wasn't like a few stairs. This was actually a 14-foot stairwell that we at the Catholic school really weren't crazy about, because at the bottom of this concrete stairs was something that we called the hawker pit, because all the boys at my school, whenever the nuns weren't looking, would run over to the steps and lean over the iron railing and spit, and then watch the spit fall about 14 feet down into this pit. And so I'm standing there watching my friend tumble backwards, head over heels, down this long set of stairs. And it was horrifying. I mean, mostly because I thought she was gonna die, and I also thought, she's gonna land in the spit, you know? So I go down, run down, pick her up. We go into the school, and again, we know where everything is because it's our school, right? This is our turf. So we go in the school, back in the bathroom, and I clean her up as best I can. You know, remember the toilet paper that looks like little bakery sheets, right? So I'm throwing them all over her legs and all over her arms, and she was just bleeding. It was really horrible. And so we walk out back to the cafeteria where the meeting is taking place, and all the girls are sitting at a long table. And we walk in, you know, my friend Carolyn's there. She looks like a mummy from the waist down. And we go up to the leader and we say, your daughter pushed my best friend down the stairs. And she says, my daughter would never do that. And we went, we're Catholic kids. We don't lie. I mean, Monsignor Hayes is right over there. We're not gonna lie. We were just astounded. So we go and we're kind of summarily ushered over to this table where all these girls are sitting, where they're making styrofoam pin cushions. It's this little brownie sweatshop. Cut the styrofoam ball in half, slap some felt over it, red and gold braid on top, and then a mason jar lid, and you got a pin cushion. And we're like, our sisters went camping. You know, so we're looking at each other. She's bleeding, we're angry, it's incredible. All of a sudden, the leader leaves and goes off. And the next thing you know, we're just standing, and Carolyn looks at me, and I look at her. The leader's daughter heads off and follows her mother. And at that moment, I grab a jar of rubber cement, and I pour it all over the chair that she'd been sitting on. And it puddled really nicely. She came back, sat down. A few minutes later, stood up and screamed, and the chair was connected to her backside. She ran all around, and we were like, for a second. And then the mother came running in and she said, "Who did this?" And of course we confessed immediately. We were Catholic. It was our grade school. And we were told to leave. That was the end of my brownie career. 20 years later, I'm at a party in Nashville, Tennessee, and the gentleman introduces me to his wife, and he says, "This is Kathy Cloninger, my wife. She's the president of the Girl Scouts USA, the head Girl Scout." And I said, "Hi." And she said, "Were you ever a Girl Scout?" And I said, "No." And then I thought, don't tell the story. And I said, "Oh, okay." So I told the story much more quickly than I am now. And she nods her head, and she excuses herself for a minute, and she comes back like 2 minutes later, and she's got something in her hand. And she reaches out and hands me a golden trefoil pin, a Girl Scout pin. And she says, "Consider yourself honorably reinstated." Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Summer Keppel, and this is a story of how Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn led me to nearly being incarcerated when I was 15 years old. So my best friend Amelia and I were watching a little movie called Wedding Crashers one day, and for anyone that's not familiar, basically to quickly sum it up, it's basically a movie about these two average-looking white guys that go wedding crashing every weekend in the pursuit of fun and trying to sleep with women. But in the movie, they always seem to have a great time, and they never really get caught. And this is where my story starts to differ from the movie. So when Amelia and I decided that we were going to Wedding Crash, we knew that we had to be prepared. So we went online, and we consulted only the most trusted of sources, YouTube, and one of the more esteemed websites on the internet, Yahoo Answers. And we got a lot of great information. There's 3 major things that we needed to remember before we had ventured onto wedding crashing. We needed to make sure that we dressed for the occasion. We needed to go with a card to blend in. And most importantly, we needed to make sure that we had our story straight for if we did get confronted, what our connection was to the couple. So with that knowledge in mind, we also needed to figure out how to get there because neither of us were even old enough to have a license. So I consulted one of my older sisters, Christy. I told her about this idea, and not only did she agree to drive me, she thought this idea was awesome and encouraged it. So we pick a Saturday during the prime wedding season, and we just pick a random venue that we figure is gonna have a wedding going on. And we get dropped off, and we're feeling really good at this point. We're going into the lobby, Journey's Don't Stop Believing is playing, and we're feeling great at this point. There's a photo booth in the lobby, and we decide to hit that up because there's lots of fun props, and we figure this is where we'll start our night. So we take a bunch of photos, and next to the photo booth is a guest book. And for some reason, we thought it'd be a really smart idea to sign our real names in the guest book, and also, just to make it even better, put our real photos next to our real names, because apparently Yahoo Answers didn't go over that part. So from there, we decided to venture into the reception and try to hit the dance floor. That lasted about 15 seconds before we were caught, considering we were the only people that looked to be 11 years old in the venue, and we were told to leave. We basically forgot the golden rule of wedding crashing, which is to have your story straight. We absolutely did not. When asked who we were, we for some reason couldn't come up with anything. So Amelia decided to blurt out that we were co-workers of the bride. Now, unless the bride was also babysitting for the house next door, there was absolutely no way that we were co-workers with her. So that story didn't fly. They told us to leave, and we did immediately. But we still left feeling accomplished, like we did what we had to do, and we had a fun time, and we thought there was no harm done. But we were really wrong. Because what Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn don't tell you is that sometimes when you crash a wedding, the groom of said wedding might happen to be a lawyer. A really pissed off lawyer. So the next day, I'm enjoying one of my first days of summer vacation, and my sister informs me that the police are looking for me. And I've been accused of stealing money from a gift box at a wedding. So, as a very fragile 15-year-old that I was, this was not in my character at all. I had never been in trouble before, and this was probably the worst situation I could find myself in. So I spent my first day of summer vacation being literally brought downtown and placed into an interrogation room at the police station. I decided to leave my sister Christy, who encouraged this idea, at home, and brought in my other older sister, Jenna, who studied legal studies in college and is also clocked in about 10,000 hours of Dateline. So she was in her glory. So as I sat in the cold metal chair of this interrogation room, shaking and crying and mapping out how exactly this was going to ruin my entire life, Jenna sat there in her full glory, as she was born to do this, telling the cop that they can roll the tapes because nothing ever happened and they won't find anything. And she also asked a very good question of how would they even know that money was missing if money was missing? So this lovely couple actually decided to call up everyone that went to their wedding and ask them how much money they gave. And I'm not sure about you, but if I went to a wedding and got called and asked how much money I gave them, I'm probably gonna round up to the next 100. That's absolutely not an accurate way to try to get that information. But in the end, we didn't steal. They had no real evidence against us. So we just had to write an apology letter. So we did, but now that I'm an adult and I have a bit more of a backbone than I did when I was 15, I would like to add something into that apology letter. I am sincerely sorry to the bride and groom that you have such cheap-ass wedding guests, that you really felt that the only plausible explanation for the sad amount of money in your money box was that I stole it. And I didn't walk away with this without learning a huge valuable lesson that every young woman learns in their life. And Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn taught me this lesson, that if you want to succeed, you must approach every situation with the same amount of confidence as an average-looking white man. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Breen. So, Big Brothers have a lot to offer. Advice on how to speak to girls, exposure to new films and movies, and also birth certificates that are suitable for borrowing to get fake IDs. So my brother's about 3 years older than I am, which means when I was 19, he was 22, room to spare. It's the summer before my sophomore year of college, and I'm about to head back, and I'm really excited. It's gonna be a lot of fun. My friends and I are gonna live in an 8-person apartment, and it's just going to be great, and we're hoping to maybe get into some of the bars in Baustin, which we've never been able to do as freshmen. It's sort of beyond our reach. Most college students have fake IDs in Baustin, but they're kind of Canal Street garbage, and they don't fool anybody. So my friend John, who's also from New Jersey, tells me, I got a better way. He says, some friends of mine from high school have gone to this sleepy little outpost DMV up in northern Jersey where he's from. He said, there's only 2 windows, old people working there, they never ask you any questions, you're in and out in 20 minutes, piece of cake. He said, if I had an older brother, I would definitely do this. And you're a fool if you don't. So I said, all right, I'm gonna go for it. And so 2 days before my loving, trusting parents are supposed to drive me back to college, I head up to this DMV in their car, and I'm psyching myself up the whole way because I normally wouldn't do this kind of thing. I'm not this kind of person, so I'm just kind of like grilling myself up to it. I get there and it's closed on Fridays and weekends. So I could kill John, but I know if I don't do this now, I'll never do it. I'll never get the nerve up again. So I get back in the Parkway, fly down to the DMV nearest our house, which I learned later is the largest DMV. It's the main DMV in the state. 30 desks, definitely not sleepy. So as a quick aside, I'll tell you about my summer job. I worked at a beach club, and I was what's called a porch boy, which is like a glorified gopher. You get the members chaise lounges, you put up umbrellas, you bust their tables, all this kind of stuff. And there's also a bar at the club, and I'm friendly with the bartenders because my older brother worked there, and they're about his age. And these guys are pretty cool. At an evening function, if a member sends back a drink or they make one wrong, they'd kind of give you it on the sly. And they also tell me that the two head bartenders, these crusty old guys who have been there forever, barely even keep a back of the envelope inventory for the bar. So as a consequence, bottles are flying off these shelves like they have wings. So many, in fact, that these guys actually throw a couple my way. They have so many. And so by the end of the summer, I've got about a dozen bottles of rum, vodka, whatever, padded in 2 gym bags hidden in my parents' basement. The plan is I'm going to go up to the sleepy DMV, get my piece of cake ID, and give one of these bags to John. We'll both take one to Baustin, divide and conquer, easy. So I go into this DMV, and immediately I'm nervous. I'm seeing how big this is. I'm thinking, this is crazy. I can't believe I'm doing this, but I get my nerve up. I walk to the counter, and I give my brother's birth certificate, trying to look confident. And the man says to me, okay, sounds good. He types on his keyboard. I asked for a boating license, because if you ask for a real license, they give you a duplicate, which everyone knows is a red flag to bouncers. But of course, it's probably a red flag at the DMV when you ask for a boating license. But I'm too stupid to know this, so I go ahead. The guy says, sure, no problem, Mr. Breen. Oh, by the way, have you had any moving violations recently? And I say, no. And I'm thinking, what the hell? So he says, okay, no problem. It'll just be a few minutes. Go back and take a seat. I go down to back to the waiting room, and I'm starting to panic. I'm thinking, that was not a normal question. Why did he ask that? This can't be routine. And I'm thinking, I should just get up and get out of here. But I tell myself, be tough, relax, stick it out. It's going to be worth it. So I'm sitting there. About a minute later, I feel his hand on my arm. I look up, and there's a giant cop standing next to me. He looks at me in the eyes, and he goes, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. So he was actually pretty cool. He handcuffed me in front, so I didn't have to have him in back in the squad car, and it would hurt. He takes me to the station. He puts me in a room, tells me to sit tight. A couple minutes later, I look up, someone calls my name. It's my uncle, who is an FBI agent. He comes over and tells me, look, I talked to the cops to try to get them to drop this, but you've already been booked. It's too late. There's nothing I can do. I'm going to follow you home from the DMV, so if you get pulled over and your license is confiscated, you won't go to jail twice in one day. Of course, I don't want him to do this, but there's nothing I can say to dissuade him. So I'm driving home. I'm freaking out. All I can think about is this bag in my car. What am I going to do? Because, of course, the bag is still in my car. I never gave it to my friend. So we get home. I pull over, and I roll down my window. I tell him, I'm freaking out. I got to drive around the block and take some deep breaths. I'm hoping he doesn't say, I'll follow you. He doesn't say, he says, I'll meet you there. So thank God. I drive around this neighborhood frantically looking for a place to ditch this bag. I don't want to just leave it on the side of the road, because if someone sees me and turns me in, I'll get caught. Plus, I still want the alcohol. So I finally find this little hill. I slide the bag down the hill, kind of cover it with some leaves, and I go home to take my lumps. My uncle says, see ya, good luck. My parents, of course, rip me a new one. What is wrong with you? How stupid are you? What were you thinking? And I just sit there with my tail between my legs, because I am stupid. I have no excuse. It's totally stupid. Finally, they finish with me. They send me to my room, and I quietly call John, and I tell him this story. And there's kind of like a lot of shocked silence on his end, and to his credit, not that much laughter. And I say, look, if we still want this booze, you got to come get it, because there is no way I'm putting this in my parents' car on Sunday. I'm not going to get in trouble twice. And he does. He comes down the next day and takes the bag back to college. No incident, no problem. And so I lost my license for 6 months, but that didn't hurt so much because I was going back to Boston. I didn't have a car anyway. I also had a $750 fine, and that did hurt. And it's a good thing I didn't need the money to go out to the bars, because I wouldn't have had it. And so the story never came out about the liquor until much later at a family party, when the statute of limitations had sort of passed, and it was funny at that point. That Sunday, my parents drove me back to college, and as you can imagine, it was not a pleasant drive. There was a fog of disappointment in that car. But they didn't lay it on too thick. They kind of, finished, turned the page, and said, we just hope that you have learned your lesson. And I really had. That Thanksgiving, John bought a laminating machine on the United Airlines Sky Mall, and we made our own fake IDs. Piece of cake. Thank you.
All right, let's give give it up for the storytellers this evening. What an amazing show. Now it's going to be in your hands. But first, before you vote, we would like to invite all the storytellers back up on stage to give you 3 words, just as a reminder of their story. So if you could all come on up, I'll step aside.
All right. I am Noah Baustin, Summer Camp Prank.
I'm Lisa Cain, Awakening Mother Sailboat.
Joe Gannon, no tattoos, no underwear.
Kate Field, not the favorite.
Oran Kaufman, passport.
Doug Creighton, gun, border, surrender.
Jim Brissette, naked stranger, 2 a.m.
Kate Mesmer, brownies, concrete, reinstated.
Summer Keppel, teenage wedding crasher.
Ian Breen, fake ID.
All right, now the hard part is yours. If you could vote for 2 of your favorite stories. Again, remember, you do get 2 votes, but 2 separate votes for 2 separate stories. And we will come around and collect the ballots. While we are tabulating, we will have another storyteller share a story with you, and then we will announce the top 3 stories from this evening. And they will go on to compete in the Best of Valley Voices, which is set to hit the stage at the Academy on September 28th. And I'd like to bring up Doug Raybeck to share another story with you. Please welcome him to the stage.
Thank you. 2 things. I'm here courtesy of Maureen, who actually won the flip. I'm an alternate, AKA filler. Okay? And I am not channeling Johnny Cash, even if it appears that way. This has a role to play in the story I'm about to tell you. It happened a few years ago when I was in high school. Yeah, a few. Now, I have to give you a preamble. I was raised in a tiny New Hampshire village, 1,100 people, very homogeneous. Everyone was white, everyone was Protestant, everyone, except for 8, were Republicans. Everyone had Franks and beans on Saturday night. That's how you knew when the week ended. My uncle had given me his old collection of National Geographics, and I discovered there's a world out there. And I wanted out. So, come high school, I worked hard on my grades. I was very good as a student, and I became president of everything, editor of everything, lettered in 2 sports. Not because I was all that eager to do that, but because I wanted a scholarship. It was the only way I was ever going to get to college. We didn't have any money, and my family had no particular interest in higher education. So I worked really hard. But, and this is something all married women know, and most unmarried women also know, men don't grow up. We get older, we wrinkle, we lose hair we want, and grow hair we don't want. We sag, we bag, we stoop, we lose our butts. But we don't grow up. In here, everybody's 18. Every male is 18. And that is my excuse, because I was 18. So despite all this really good behavior, which kept me from getting expelled by about that much, I decided to pull a prank. Old-fashioned high school, only 300 and some students. Everybody met in a large room on the second floor every day where the principal, Iva Hackler. Now, you don't make up that name. Mr. New Hampshire, Iva Hackler, would read the day's event in the news and what was going to happen. And I discovered on one of my forays that on the third floor, there was only one classroom, but there was a crawl space out of that classroom through a 3 by 3 foot door. And that would take you in over the roof of where the meeting was. This was the assembly, happened every morning. You sang a psalm, you listened, you pledged allegiance, you got out and you went to class. In the middle of that ceiling was a round 2.5 foot circle that could be lifted out, and probably in the old days, and it was an old building, they could lower a chandelier down for lighting, that sort of thing. I showed up early one morning with a paper bag, inside of which was an old pair of jeans, an old flannel shirt that had already been pre-rigged with safety pins. I stuffed it full of newspaper. I moved the thing off before anybody came into the room, and I waited until the assembly showed up, all 3 classes. Teachers up on stage, Iva Hackler at the podium, and he begins to speak. Upon which I go, "Steve, look out, Steve, Steve!" It was very satisfying. There were screams. Female screams, male screams, chairs were knocked over, and I had figured this whole thing out. I wore black in high school because black is cool. So I came out, closed the door, ran down the stairs to the second floor, ducked into the classroom at the base of the stairs, and waited for people to come thundering up the stairs, which they certainly did. Followed by Vice Principal Elma Hawkins, in charge of, among other things, discipline. He taught in that room, so he knew exactly where the place was. I came out of the room, walked up behind all the other students, charging up. The whole room is packed with students standing around looking for the culprit. Mr. Hackett turns to me and says, "Raybeck, why are you so dusty?" Busted. I got a leave without pay for the remainder of the week and came this close from being excommunicated. The end result was okay. I did get into college on a scholarship and got out of that tiny town. Thank you.
All right, I missed that one. How do you do? Good? All right, congratulations. Great job. All right, so just a couple things to remind you before we let the winners come up here and take their final applause. Reminder to download the Valley Voices podcast, where you can hear all these stories again. We produce that every couple weeks now during the season. There's 2 episodes out already, and there's more to come. Also, get your tickets for the final show of the season, which will be at Hawks and Reed in Greenfield on June 6th. There are still tickets available for that show, so get in on that. And also, if you have a story to tell, there's one more opportunity to do that. You have until midnight tomorrow night to audition your first line. You could be up here, at Hawks and Reed telling your story. The theme is open road, so we're looking for some good road stories to start the summer off with and finish our season. All right, who's ready to find out who won this round? All right, so these storytellers will be going on to our Best of Valley Voices Story Slam in the fall, in late September. So look for tickets for that as well. Coming in, and you guys can come up when I call your name. Coming in at number 3 is Doug Creighton. No guns, just Doug. Congratulations. Number 2, no crashing this party, Summer Keppel. Woo! And tonight's winner is Miss Kate Mesner. Reinstated. You can see them all on the Valley Voices stage, the Best of show in September. Thank you guys so much.